So, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. I'm joined by Dr. Lexi Duscher, Dr. Duscher's research focuses on optimizing cost-effective and efficient fish cell culture for the development of cultivated seafood. Lastly, Dr. Duscher's research has been published in various academic journals. So, Dr. Duscher, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So when did you first get interested in cultivated seafood? I've heard of cultivated like farming, animal farming meat or something, but never really seafood before. So how did you come across that?
Yeah, I mean, really, I didn't know much about it until I saw this position opening in Dr. Reza Visapor's lab. But it was exciting to be able to take all of the skills that I've learned throughout my career with molecular and cell science and apply them in something totally different and that is more directly applicable rather than initial basic science to a final product, which is really exciting. There's still a lot of basic science that has to be done, which is great and important, but it was exciting to apply it to something that could be sustainable, help with kind of alleviate some of the current pressures that we have, especially with our growing population and food availability. So it was just an exciting avenue and it's been a lot of fun to learn about.
So what exactly is the specific process for cultivating seafood?
Yeah, well, there's some variation in the process, but essentially what we're trying to do is the same thing as other cultivated meats, where you're going to grow some type of cell, generally some type of stem cell that can proliferate and grow a lot of cells at once. And then you might differentiate those cells into meat cell types, such as muscle cells or fat cells. And then you want to grow a lot of these cells up and you can combine them in such a way with either an edible scaffolding, or people are trying to use 3D bioprinting, which is exciting, to put these different cell types together in a meat-like structure. And so ideally, we are trying to create a product that is real meat, essentially. You're using real cells. We're trying as hard as we can to not genetically modify anything, so just natural processes for differentiation and growing without adding anything that's not food grade or any additional chemicals that people wouldn't want to eat in general, and creating a final product that are the real cells with this hopefully same nutritional value as a real piece of meat. But there's a lot that goes into that, into each of those pieces of how do you grow a lot of cells at once, sustainably, and as cleanly as possible, and how do you differentiate them into the cell type that you want? How do you put them together to get that flavorful, textured, meat-like product that you want? So all of these things we're currently working on, and lots of other groups are working on this as well. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, that's interesting. So is there an ability to genetically modify meat if you need to? I've heard of, obviously, with agriculture, but I suppose, I guess you could with meat if you wanted to for some nutritional value or.
Absolutely, yes. And there are groups conducting that right now. But as you probably know, there are some people that have issues with genetically modified.
Yeah, limits the, I guess, limits the, I guess, the potential market for people that are afraid of them. Yeah,
exactly. And so that, you do have to think about consumer perception, of course, but there are still genetically modified products out there that are completely safe, as far as we know, that people still purchase and eat. So it's not out of the realm. I mean, I believe there are people creating genetically modified meat products or working on that. And a lot of that starts at the cellular level, really. So you're going to genetically modify what an individual cell might do. So you might do genetic modifications so that you can change one cell type into another for your meat product. Or like you said, perhaps for the cells to produce something to increase some specific type of nutritional value, or to increase or decrease a specific characteristic of those cells. So absolutely that can and is being done for some cultivated meat, but we're trying to not do that at this point to reach a broader audience, because this is already still a newer topic, and just like anything, you gotta find ways to draw in the consumer.
Yeah,
and
I guess
we want this to be healthy too. So
kind of a gradual build towards
exactly,
things. With new technology, people are always concerned about the aspects of it. So
of course,
I guess introduce them to one thing at a time.
yes.
Unless
If we
they
can make it as
freak out.
simplistic as possible, that's my
Yeah.
dream, to make
Yeah.
sure, you know, that we can grab more people.
Yeah, sure. So how challenging is it to get it to taste like a normally processed seafood, for example?
Great question. In all honesty, we are not there yet in our lab. We are still working on a lot of the basics of it. So one main thing for cultivated seafood versus cultivated beef, for example, or even chicken, is that there's just so much less research out there on fish and seafood cells. More research is currently being done, but compared to mammalian cells that are generally used for biomedical applications, we just don't know nearly as much. So a lot of what we are trying to do is that basic research. What do these cells need that mammalian cells don't, and so forth. So to get to that final product for taste will be some time for us. But the idea is really getting the right mixture of the muscle and fat cells. You know, muscle is really nice for the structure and the texture, but a lot of flavor oftentimes can come from fat. And especially if you're trying to get a type of filleted meat, we might have to structure it specifically so that you can it'll look and appear and be textured just like that fish fillet. But again,
Wow.
if we're using the same cells from an animal without killing an animal, so we're just growing the cells over and over. So you're hoping that with those same cells that are from the animal, you can get that same taste product. But that is not my expertise, unfortunately, and we're not quite there. But it's a great question,
Right.
and something we're going to be looking into further. There's other compounds that you might add to try to get more of that flavor. But again, that's not my expertise at this time. But we hope to look into that more soon.
What type of seafood are you currently working on trying to produce in a lab?
Yeah, so our lab is currently working on, I'm more focused on fish at this point, and trying to create growth medium or mechanisms to create growth medium that can be applied to different fish cells. We can get a wide variety. However, some work in our lab is also focusing on oyster cell development. And that's really what we're focused on right now. We have a lot of other ideas that we want to try. But again, a lot of it is once we can get something to work in one animal cell type, we're hoping we can apply that to others. But fish is my main concern right now because I think there's a lot of application and that we can spread that really easily. But we're also interested eventually in cell-based crab as well, and some products such as the oyster or crab that you don't need to spend as much time and effort in you would a fish fillet. So you can create a more unstructured product that still has the same taste properties, hopefully, such as a mixed product like a crab cake. So maybe
Yeah.
you can get like cultivated lumps of crab that you can then put in a product. And that might be a lot more feasible or even easier to create than a larger fish fillet product. So we're thinking about all those aspects, but right now I'm mostly concentrated on fish.
Sure. Have you ever tried any cultured meat before?
I have not yet. I
Okay.
would love to, but I have
Okay.
not. I'm open to it and excited.
Yeah. I guess you'd have to be in your line of work. You'd have to be
Right.
open.
You have to have some faith in it. So
So I know that some of your research is on like the cost effectiveness of it. That seems to me like an incredibly important aspect of it if you want it to succeed in the marketplace. So how do you try to how do you ensure that a product like this is cost effective?
great question. There is a lot of research being done on that, on the different parts of the whole cultivated meat process right now. And there's other groups working on what's called a life cycle analysis. So you try to see, okay, how much does it cost to initially grow up the cells? How much does it cost to grow up a large batch of these cells in a large bioreactor? Then how much does it cost to put these together? And that is not just including, the cells and the media that they're grown in, but it also includes how much electricity, how much water is being used. Do you need land space? So it's trying to come up with an overall analysis of how much things cost with the life cycles. So that's not, from the beginning cell to the final product. So that's not a main component of what I'm working on, but we have collaborators on a big grant that we're working on with that, that are experts in the life cycle analysis. So that will be interesting. But a big part of what I'm working on right now in trying to create serum-free optimized media for fish cells is how do we create media that's cost effective and that you can scale up cheaply. So right now, a lot of general cell biology, if you're trying to grow cells in the lab, is done using a product called serum. And most often cases, it's called FBS, or fetal bovine serum. Have you heard of this? Or?
No. What is that? Yeah.
So this is, it's not a great process. It is serum collected from unborn calf fetuses, but it's a natural part of the, or not a natural part, but it's a part of the meat industry. So it's not a product that's being created just for cell biology, but it's a product that just comes from meat industry. However, you might expect that cells grown on this, people aren't going to want to eat it, right?
Right.
And because it's coming from this industry, it has to go through a lot of steps to be sterilized and quality control, and it's just a very, very expensive product. So one of the first things that I'm specifically working on is trying to get rid of using any animal-based serum. We want this to be essentially an animal-free product, other than the original animal starting cells.
Right.
And so that will help with quality control and greatly reducing cost. So this FBS, this serum, has all these different components and growth factors in it that cells love, that cells need to grow and be happy, or in some cases to differentiate into the muscle or fat cell type that we want. So what we're trying to do is figure out, well, which of these components from FBS are important for each of these different cell lines, and different cell lines do require different things. So we're trying to figure out what those components are, and then how can we make those components cheaply to create a cost-effective media. So that's really kind of the first step in reducing overall cost, I believe. And then once you get to that point, there'll be, as I mentioned, the whole life cycle analysis of how do you reduce overall cost for the rest of the processes. But that's my main focus right now, is to replace that serum with cost-effective and humane and sustainable components that the cells still like to grow on.
Yeah, I guess the easier the method is for production, it'll be easier to produce it on a mass scale.
Exactly, and a consistent scale, because you might imagine that each calf fetus might be a little bit different in their protein concoction. So if we can have a defined amount of different components in a media, we can create a more consistent product, which is huge for marketing this product as well.
Definitely. Yeah, that would, I imagine, the calf fetus part would also scare away some people.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't like it. So, I mean, I don't think anyone does, but the reality is most cell biology and cell culturing is done on a small scale, like I said, for biomedical applications. But if you want to produce a lot of cells to create a meat product, you need a lot of those growth factors. So how do we do that without this serum, and how do we do it cost effectively? So that's what we're working on.
So what would be like the step-by-step production process in like a summary version for someone that isn't working in the field, who are listening to this? Like, how would you break down how this production process looks like?
For the whole meat product?
Yeah,
sure. Well, first off, I believe that there could be some optional ways to do this, but I can kind of go through what I think is a very straightforward one.
Sure.
So initially you have, there's two ways you can start. You can start with embryonic stem cells from an animal. Again, that these were obtained from an animal without really even growing the animal up. They're from an embryo. And so you can use these and turn them into any cell type that you want. And so you can start from there. Or you can obtain adult stem cells, so adult muscle stem cells or adult fat stem cells, and then just try to create a lot of these. So there's two different ways to start it potentially. But no matter what, you're going to start with your one cell line, and then you're going to try to grow a lot of those cells, usually in a big bioreactor. And then you can take all of these massive cells, and this is when you're going to start to try to put them together to create the product. So this can be done either growing the cells on some type of scaffolding, So there's different ways to do this. Some people are working on algae-based scaffolding or plant-based scaffolding. So something that these cells can attach to and help create that structured final product. Or you can try to put these cells into something that's called a bioink that you can use to literally 3D print a structured product. And this is actually being done by several different companies right now for smaller pieces of meat. And then once you get that, what's nice about that bioprinting is you can really layer in exactly where the fat and the muscle cells go to get that nice textured look, especially for fish cells, I think will be really cool, or for fish fillets. But then once you get that final product, you really just will want to do quality control and make sure that it tastes good, it's safe, there's no contamination, which you have a lot less to worry about with contamination with this than you would a traditional fish fillet. And then put it on the market. So, but the big part of it is again, how do you create a lot of those cells cost effectively?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But yeah, your point about being cleaner, that definitely makes a lot of sense considering, yeah, how dirty a lot of the animals that we do currently eat are, and the production process try to prevent them from having bacteria or something on. So.
Exactly. And so that's another big draw to creating cultivated meat. Now, let me be clear. I mean, a lot of industries are doing things sustainably and cleanly.
Yeah, it's not industries don't suck. It's just ways to
I
improve.
view this as a an alternative, not a replacement.
Right.
I don't think we'll ever be a society that never eats a real animal again. But I think this is a really great alternative or potential solution for a lot of different reasons. But we can talk about that more later. But yeah, what's nice about it is that when you grow it up in the lab, grow these cells up in the lab, you're going to have quality control the entire time. If your cell culture gets contaminated, we do quality control tests. A lot of times these can eventually be automated throughout the industrial process when we finally create these products. So you can really make sure that you have a contamination-free final product at the end.
Yeah.
Whereas in the normal meat industry, you have to worry about providing a lot of antibiotics depending on the situation, or there are other natural parasites or things like that. And then when you have the final product, you have to make sure that you're storing it correctly so that it doesn't grow any contamination on it. And these are things that you just don't have to worry about quite as much. And so we're also hoping, we can create a product that never uses antibiotics. And right now we are culturing without any antibiotics. So it's nice to know that that's one less component in there that is a concern in the food that we eat today.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What would you say are the potential benefits for marine life if people were to focus more on cultivated seafood?
Oh, so many. Again, I do think we can sustainably fish and sustainably get marine life, but it's becoming less and less that way with a higher population and also people's livelihoods. But hopefully we can try to translate this into a new livelihood for lots of people and train and have a new generation of experts in cultivated meat. But essentially for marine life, one of the biggest things, and I think Dr. Reza Visapur touched on this in his talk with you, is that right now a lot of fish in aquaculture is fed by other fish. So even if you're sustainably growing, let's say, like a tuna, you still have to feed that tuna high quality protein. And oftentimes that comes from catching a bunch of other fish in the ocean. So what would be nice is that we can really reduce that overall biomass that's caught from the ocean and can help stabilize those ecosystems a lot better. As well as a lot of the practices for catching fish can be unsustainable for the environment or hurt reefs and things like that. So we're kind of hoping that this will reduce those negative effects. Again, maybe not totally replace them, but have some reduction. And so even if we don't create, the exciting parts of cultivated meat are that even if we don't create a final product, there are people that are working on creating these cultivated meats for animal food. So for dog, cat food, as well as potential fish feed in aquaculture. So maybe you still want to grow up animals in aquaculture, but instead of feeding them fish caught in the wild, you can feed them cultivated meat fish, and they're still going to all have the same nutritional value, and it'll be tasty to them and palatable. So I think there's a lot of potential to really limit and reduce how much fish is caught in the ocean to get fish populations back up to where we want them. And same with catching, different crustaceans like lobsters and crabs, and oysters and things like that. Although oysters can be relatively sustainable, they're not always safe to eat depending on the season with Vibrio bacterial contamination. So if you can grow up an oyster in a lab, that's one less thing you have to worry about, and you can keep those oysters in the environment to help filter out the water and keep the water clean. So there's lots of benefits to leaving animals where they are in the ocean and eating lab-based seafood instead.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, looking kind of into the future a bit with that, once a product like cultivated meat or cultivated seafood is produced in a cost-effective manner, that it could drastically affect sort of, other industries of, traditional, fishing and animal farming, especially with, the pressures on different societies due to climate change and, mass migrations and all these other factors at play.
Absolutely.
Where these farms and fisheries are, disrupted tremendously. It seems like there is a potential, if lab-grown products are able to be produced in a cost-effective manner, that could take over to a certain extent. How much do you keep this in mind when you're doing this work?
A lot. I personally, at least, I was at an aquaculture conference recently, and I was slightly concerned that some people, because I was presenting on cell-based seafood, and I was, kind of concerned, well, what kind of pushback would I get? Would people think that I'm taking away from their industry? And I don't blame them. What was shocking to me, though, is that I got really very little pushback, and lots of people were more excited about the potential possibility. However, there still is, like you mentioned, a possibility of reducing other industries, and that's people's livelihoods. And so that is an important thing to keep in mind. But at the same time, the reality is we are already, and have been for a long time, taking more than we can sustainably take. And it's, again, some industries are doing it right and trying to be as sustainable as possible, but our population is growing rapidly, and no matter what, we're going to need more food. So it's possible that some of these industries could keep going the way they are, if climate change doesn't totally disrupt what they're already doing, while we can have an alternative that feeds that additional growing population. But if we are to take away from these industries, I like to think of it as, hopefully it's in a manner that we can help then the oceans to restabilize, get back to a healthier manner, whether we can be more sustainable in how we collect from the ocean. And then possibly we can train these industries in different aspects for food production rather than what they were traditionally doing. The other exciting thing for cultivated meat is that theoretically, with the right infrastructure, you could grow it anywhere. So if there's a place that relies on selling a lot of fish, you could maybe put a lab there and or manufacturing facility, and try to grow it there rather than catching it locally and sustain that environment a little bit better. Alternatively, you could potentially put a lab in a place where there are no fish. You could reduce overall shipping costs, as well as potential issues from collecting one part of the world and sending to another part of the world, as well as just availability. Places that don't get a lot of seafood in general, you could create that for them in the middle of, let's say, a desert, possibly. So there's some exciting opportunities there for that. But yeah, I do always think about how it might disrupt the industry, or it already is, but I hope it's in the most beneficial manner possible.
Yeah, I mean,
the world.
yeah. I was hope for the best. I mean,
right.
Historically, it seems industries are always coming and going, and especially with the world today in its current state, and as we mentioned already with climate change, it's something that it's out of the hands of, I think, a lot of people. It's just going to get to the point where it's like doing whatever is necessary to feed the population of the world. And if an industry can't keep up with that, it's just going to end up falling off, and governments can, I guess, do something to try to help mitigate the blow to those people working in those industries. But you can't really save a dying industry to a certain extent. I think you kind of look at like coal, for example, as something that's just not going to last. So it's interesting. To what extent is your work kind of driven by animal ethics to a certain extent? Do you think a lot about like, not having to slaughter animals is something that is a pretty amazing feat to be able to have as a society? How much do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's an extremely important aspect of this work, and really an exciting part of it. I do eat some levels of meat, so I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan, mainly because I do believe that meat in general has a lot of beneficial properties for nutritional value, and so there are some people that need specific nutrition, and then some don't. People are different, right? And so what's exciting is that for people that maybe don't want to eat meat solely because of animals suffering, that this can provide another avenue for them to get that same, hopefully, nutritional value without doing that. So that's an extremely exciting avenue for this. And then for me, as a biologist and starting with marine science, it's super exciting to know that we can create a product that doesn't harm the ecosystems and keeps everything else running as it should naturally in the environment. So that's where I think it's really exciting to not have to collect and kill these animals. And then oftentimes, you're only eating a small portion of an animal. So for a fish fillet, right, you're going to throw away the skins, the bones, the head. That's a lot of waste. And so this is exciting that you don't have to waste any part of an animal, and you can still get that same quality product, hopefully. So I definitely think about it as it's a huge part of the industry, and we're hoping that we can get consumers that traditionally don't eat meat for various reasons, such as animal suffering. So some vegans, for example, might not eat meat solely because of animal suffering. And in this process and product, there's no animal suffering, not even in the first spot. So even when we get the initial cells, we might take a biopsy from an animal, such as a fish, but that's it. Then you can put the fish back and they're still alive, happy, living their normal life. And then you grow up those biopsy cells. So it's exciting that you can do that rather than killing an entire animal.
Yeah, definitely. Now, what has been I'm curious, because we've talked about consumers and, trying to gauge their reaction to a product like this. What has the reception been, though, amongst like people, family and friends? Like when you first get into this line of work, we're like, oh, I'm growing meat in a lab. And they're like, what is that?
Absolutely. It's funny because, a lot of people I know are scientists. So lots of people think it's interesting,
right.
But then other people in my family, definitely they're like, I don't know if I do that. I don't know if I try that. But the more, like anything, the more people learn about something with facts and learn potential benefits, the more open they might be to at least trying or tasting. Like my brother, for example, is a avid fisherman, hunter, loves meat, and all of that processes, but he's even open to at least trying it, at least some type of testing, just to see, right? So I think there's some level of excitement, but then of course, there are people that are just like, that's unnatural, that can't be good for anyone. And I get that. And I think a huge part of us as scientists in any field as a scientist is being able to explain to anyone why something's important, potentially useful, and most importantly, safe. So I think that's going to be up to us to be able to come up with that summary of how we explain this product in the future. But until we get to a product on the market, I think we have some time to conceptualize. Like, even what do we exactly call it? There's debates on that right now. So, but there's surveys that are being done, especially on one grant that we have now, on consumer perception and what they would accept and wouldn't accept. And that's why also I think it's important to try to limit things that people don't accept, like don't use FBS serum and don't use, try not to kill the animal in the process, as well as trying to limit any genetic modification, depending.
Yeah.
So the more things you can do to increase, to pull a couple different groups of people in, I think is exciting. But I also like to always compare it to, if you think just not that many years ago, how many vegetable-based protein products were out there, like a beyond just a veggie local burger.
Yeah.
There was like nothing, right? And now, lots of people thought it was weird or would never taste very good. And now there's these plant-based products that really do taste a lot like meat, and people love them and people buy them. And there's more and more products, and it's a growing industry, and it happened relatively fast. And so I like to kind of compare it to that in the sense that with the right marketing and the right fact-based evidence for people for nutrition as well, that this could become a product like that, where it initially maybe wasn't accepted by most people, but slowly you can grab more people in, and then they tell their friends that it was delicious and they feel great off of it, and so forth, and spread that way. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think there's a lot of positive potential.
Yeah, I think that strategy makes sense, especially because once you get enough people that are kind of on board with it, you can start experimenting with other ways to improve it, especially for people that are suffering from nutritional deficiencies around the world that may need some extra additional thing kind of added to this product, which I think is a major probably concern, again, with like climate change and stuff, and trying to feed the world in a healthy manner.
Well, and the other thing with that is that the potential exists. Now, exactly how we can do this, it's something that's being worked on, but the potential exists that there's some products, maybe you can remove allergens. So if you can grow these cells, so for example, crustaceans like crabs or shellfish, lots of people are very allergic to these, but want to eat them. So if there's a way that we can grow these products and without the allergens present, perhaps it's a specific protein that we can grow them without, that might involve genetic modification. But if we can do that, that opens up a whole new market of people. And that's probably really exciting for a lot of people that have wanted to try that, but couldn't because of their health. So there's a lot of potential to get different markets of people than there are with traditional meat methods.
Yeah.
But a lot of that remains to be seen.
Sure. Yeah. But definitely a lot of stuff to look forward to. So, so what are you currently researching?
So currently I'm working on a few different things in Dr. Reza Vispour's lab, but we are expanding all the time. The main thing I'm working on is creating that serum-free media, specifically for fish cells. And so what we're doing is trying to come up with a method for creating serum-free media that can be applied to other types of fish cells. So right now we're using one fish cell type that's really well studied. It's called zebrafish, to try to understand the nutritional requirements of these cells, and then put it into machine learning methods and combine all of our data so that you can run a limited number of experiments for another type of fish cell. Let's say I'm from Minnesota, so let's say walleye fish cells. And you can run a limited number of experiments, put it into the machine learning model, and come up with a serum-free media a lot faster for that specific cell type than you could have previously. So we're trying to create a method where we can create serum-free medias faster in the future. So that's been a really exciting, fun project. And we're also working on differentiation. So how can we take embryonic stem cells that can theoretically turn into any cell type, and how do we specifically direct them to turn into that muscle or that cell type that we want? But other exciting things going on in our lab are primary cell culture and creating those continuous cell lines from oysters and other seafood related organisms that we're currently working on, as well as trying to develop other alternative proteins that could be added to this final product. Sure. I think Reza talked about that.
Yeah, that's cool. So a lot going on then.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
And what would you say is the best way for people to keep track of your research?
Yeah, I mean, I think keeping track of Dr. Reza Vispour's lab research. He has a website, Future Foods Lab. We're also all on LinkedIn. We also have a Facebook page for our Agricultural Research and Extension Center that we work with at Virginia Tech. So you can follow our updates there. And really, I think a great resource beyond just our research is a really wonderful foundation called Good Food Institute, or GFI. And they have so much great information on just the basics of alternative proteins in general, not just cultivated meat, but they have a lot of really, really great summaries of what other people are working on throughout the world, as well as what this product really could be and what it is and more of the science behind it, but explained in a really nice, easy to understand way. So I highly suggest looking at the Good Food Institute to learn a little bit more about this cultivated meat product as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this information. It's really cool. So
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn off the recording.